So we're going to talk about the Save As Dialog Box, which is sort of the command central for managing your files. There's a search functionality with the Save As Dialog Box. There's a breadcrumb trail that we can manage our way around to find a location that we're looking for. We have the ability to manage our files and folders. We can view and set properties for the files and folders. We can change the file type when we save it. We have some tools, including some web options, mapping a network drive, and setting up a password. And we can also save the workbook with a thumbnail image that's a picture of the workbook, which may aid us in finding it in the future. So we're in Excel in Book 1. And hopefully you've gotten into the habit by now of pressing Control S on a regular basis to save the changes in your workbook, so that in the event that Excel crashes, and that does happen, that you won't lose any of your work. Now, there are safeguards, auto recover, auto save, to help prevent you from losing work. But just to be on the safe side, Control S is a nice habit to get into. So that's one way to save your workbook, Control S. But there's another way to do it, and that's to go to the Save As dialog box. We can get there by pressing Alt-F-A, which actually used to get us there in 2010, but now we also have to press B for Browse. This is the Save As dialog box. When we're saving a file, we have the option to first look for a location that may already be there. We just don't know where it is. Maybe we set up a folder with a particular name. We don't know where it is. We select the drive. The C drive is selected, and we put a search term in here, maybe the name of the folder, and we can have Excel look for that folder so that we can save this current file in that location. We also have a breadcrumb trail. On the breadcrumb trail, there's a drop-down for these locations where if you have more than one folder, they'll be listed, and you can select one of these folders and sort of step your way to a different location than where the file currently is. The breadcrumb trail showing by default is the breadcrumb trail that takes you to where this file is currently stored. We can also manage our files and folders. We can select a file or a folder, left-click the drop-down, the Organize drop-down, and we can cut it to paste it someplace else, move the file, in other words. We can copy it to a new location. We can delete the file, rename the file, remove properties, or set properties. And the properties that you have access to will be determined by what it is that you selected in the first place, whether you've selected a workbook file or a folder. So I've got some security options, some detailed information, and the ability to manage prior versions if I had any of this file. I'm going to close that, and I'm going to go to the desktop and choose the folder that that file is in, go back to the Organize drop-down and select Properties, where I have a different array of properties that I'm dealing with because I'm dealing with a folder. I can set the permission settings, there's some security options, and so on. So I'm going to cancel out of that. Double-click that, select the file again. Part of the array of properties that you can establish for a workbook include 3 that are listed here that you can change on the fly as you're dealing with your workbook. The authors. I can add a tag or several tags separated by a comma, and we'll show you that functionality later on in another movie. I can add a title to the workbook. So those are 3 properties that are presented to you in the Save As dialog box that you can change pretty readily. I can also change, of course, the name, because that field is accessible, the file name. I can also change the workbook format. It's in the default format, Excel workbook, but there are other options here, and we covered these things actually in a prior movie, at least most of them. There are tools, including mapping a network drive, and if you're saving your workbook as a web page, there's web options that you can establish. There's general options, which actually is the ability to set a password up to open or to modify the workbook, and we'll get into this in other movies too. And finally, You can compress the pictures, if there are any, in the workbook so that it doesn't take up so much space. So when we're saving our workbook, the default is to save a thumbnail of the workbook. And I did actually save this workbook with a thumbnail. I'm going to save another copy without the thumbnail. In the same location, so that we can go back to the Alt-F-A-B and display these using a different setting, which is another option, obviously, in the Save As dialog box. We can have extra large icons. And now you see the difference between saving a workbook with a thumbnail that takes a picture of what is a blank workbook, there's no content on it, and saving it with the standard Excel icon. This might be helpful when you're looking for a workbook if there's some content that you recognize, more so maybe than the name of the workbook itself. So that's the Save As dialog box, a pretty robust feature in Excel where we have the ability to search for locations. We get a breadcrumb trail that by default is the trail that leads us to the current location of the file, but there are drop-down lists so that we can easily get to other places on the computer. We can manage our files and folders. We can set the properties for the files and folders. We can change the file type and the name of the file. We have some tools available to us for web page options, mapping a network drive, setting a password up, and compressing pictures. And finally, when we save our workbook, we can save it with a thumbnail or not.